Jack Parsons got me on the moon. Jack Parsons got me on the moon.
And thank you to our very first episode of The Week in Strange. And what a strange week it has been. We are going to start off right away with false memories can be implanted and then reversed, researchers do find. German study points to possible techniques for recognizing and correcting erroneous recollections. Has this happened to either of you?
No, it's an interesting thing because this has been knocking around for a while, this story. In different forms. When I wrote Puzzling People back in 2010, I was even writing about these implanted DARPA memories, that the DARPA had a helmet or a combat helmet that the troops could have their actual personalities switched off in terms of morality. When they went into battle, it switched off their empathy. And this has been knocking around a long time. The only thing that stops them from it is that people kick up a stink now and again about it. But I'm sure this is way more advanced than what they're letting us know.
So the researchers in Germany and the UK, they are saying that they were able to plant false memories and then help study volunteers root them out.
Yeah, that seems like something they've been trying to do since I want to say about the 1950s. The idea of taking trauma away from people. I think it kind of started with I want to say it was like with schizophrenics and people who had personality disorders back then. They were trying to remove that out of people, or they're trying to remove what they called, I think they called it battle nerves or nerve damage or something back then, what we currently call PTSD. They were trying to take those memories from the troops and erase them so that they would no longer be suffering the effects of that. But again, I think that's what the media says that it is. But I think this kind of goes into some of the topics like Project MK Ultra, where you've got people who are being programmed, and whether this is for nefarious purposes or for purposes of wholesomely helping people get over their PTSD, it could probably be used both ways. But I would imagine that this is going to be something that could be possibly weaponized and has been weaponized before.
They do love to use a technique that can be used for either good or evil. So that way it could go either way. They can spin it however they want to.
Shell shock was what they used to call it. And that's how the MK Ultra thing was discovered, dissociation in brains. They discovered that people who had not just military, but all kinds of horrific traumas, that they actually switched off. And they found this with Holocaust victims or people who lived through World War II, that they switched off part of their brain into a state of dissociation, where literally the memory was sequestered away in this place and forgotten. But what the MK Ultra, like literally a neural partition was created with actual like synapses and everything. But what then they thought to themselves, what if we implanted some kind of order or function inside a person's brain? And when they heard it say this, when the monarchs and the Manchurians idea came, that they come along and they pick up a phone one day and they call them hello, and then someone says the green cow has yellow stripes, and then they go and kill a politician or kill someone.
What was that movie that they had made? Manchurian Candidate.
Yeah.
So Sleepers.
Yeah, Sirhan Sirhan, who shot Robert Kennedy, he stank of all that. He was basically, they couldn't get anything out of him in the testimony, and he didn't even remember why he was there. Another one was the guy who shot John Lennon. There's some very funny business around that whole thing. I spoke to the detective, was one of the first detectives on the scene, and he said there was some really weird shit going on in New York that day around Central Park. There were 4 or 5 Mark Chapmans seen in the area. Wow. And they often use cults for this. The Solar Temple cult in Switzerland and France, the French Secret Service were doing this for years. And they basically all killed themselves one day in one mass sacrifice in both Switzerland and France on the same day, killed their kids and everything. And they turned out later on that the whole thing was being completely run by the French Department of Defense in Paris as a way of training basically robots. So to say that this is a new thing is misleading. But I'll tell you one thing, if they're announcing it like this, they must have made some huge, scary advances in being able to make it more effective.
Well, here's an interesting blurb. So it says the scientists used interviews to convince some study subjects that they had undergone childhood events that never happened to them, such as getting lost or being in a car accident, according to a report published Monday in the Scientific Journal. Then the researchers said that they used other interview techniques that prompted the volunteers to reassess the memories and helped them to realize that they might be false or misremembered. So they're actively manipulating people's minds.
Create realities that never existed. The implications of this is truly terrifying.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge, because if they could do this population-wise, they could do whatever they wanted. Yeah, sometimes I'm looking around at the moment at how people are behaving since the lockdown. I'm starting to wonder if many of them are in a different space anyway. But they have this is ferocious in terms of its potential for wickedness and control.
Think of the what do people call it? The Mandela effect. Where
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, people have different memories than
that seems like a slightly more benign version of it, but this is nefarious.
Remember the movie Angel Heart with Mickey Rourke, and he was a guy called Johnny Angel who had actually committed a murder in New York, and he had been living a different life altogether and unaware of his memories, and he didn't even know who he was until he was murdering people in an altered reality. And all the time this character called Lucifer or something is controlling him, this devil type creature played by Robert De Niro. But it's the same thing. He's killing people, and then he has a false memory of who he was back in World War II. So you can see, like in fiction, they've always wanted this kind of concept to be normalized, and you can do anything. You could have someone commit suicide and then put a memory commit genocide, and then put a memory in their minds that they were raised they had a wife and 2 kids and raised the perfect family.
And you think about the implications for somebody sitting on the witness stand
who's completely innocent of a crime. Put the crime into their head, and then they
they become the ultimate patsy.
This really reminds me too, as with my experience having been in the United States Marine Corps, you were talking about dissociation, and there's a major dissociative, in my opinion, a major dissociative technique that they use on Marine Corps recruits from when the first day that you come into Marine recruit training. You are no longer allowed to refer to yourself in the first person. You have to refer to yourself in I guess it's the second person. You say this recruit. That's the second person, right? Or is that third person?
Second.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, you have to, all throughout training until you put on the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor, you are this recruit, or the group that you're with are these recruits.
You're no longer yourself.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is the kind of mental spiritual dissociation then, because you're no longer looking at yourself as an individual identity. So I would imagine that could cause somewhat of a dissociative, like you're saying, a partition, like you've got a hard drive that you can partition off a few gigabytes of to put a different operating system on. I think you can do the same thing with certain types of rote and repetition training. Like I think, Thomas, you've talked about before, like the whole thing of doing things by the numbers and stuff was at the Prussian military indoctrination, where they do things, and I always say that by the numbers. It's like hypnotic. Everything in military boot camp has, a song and dance that goes along with it that everybody has memorized. So I'd imagine that kind of thing would partition off, just like on a hard drive, a part of someone's persona or personality that could be used for something.
One of the most powerful and potentially most destructive techniques that is out there is the compartmentalization of the human mind.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I was just going to say the Prussian military, before there was drill before that, going back to the Romans, but drill was just used for marching and it was a training thing. The Prussians discovered that drill could be used to change the personality of the unit and the soldiers by constantly having them drilling and constantly having them marching, and to the point where they were basically a robotic. They couldn't do anything that was outside drilling. They had to have drilling constantly. And it made
a few people like that.
It made them a very efficient fighting force. But prior to that, drill was just like, part of training or discipline. It wasn't to destroy your personality. And you see those, you ever see like the North Korean soldiers marching in perfect uniform, the Chinese, they throw like 100 of them will throw their assault rifles with a bayonet up in the air. And I've seen the Marines do that as well in the US, and they catch it and swing it around here. And then the girls in the Russian army, it's just unbelievable. And that's what that all is. The hive mind replaces the personality.
And but it is fascinating to watch.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. I can still do those rifle tricks as long as you give me a couple beers first. I'll be able to do them for you.
just make sure to pay that off.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of gaping holes, our next story has to do with Mexico, and the headline reads: "Giant sinkhole opens in field in the middle of Mexico." A gaping sinkhole measuring 200 feet in diameter opened up over the weekend on a farmland in Mexico. It appeared Saturday in the town of Juan C. Bonilla, in the state of Puebla in southeastern Mexico. According to state officials, it is estimated to be about 50 feet deep. So have fun parking your car right there.
The sinkhole thing is terrifying because they seem to just happen anywhere. And I saw a car being swallowed up in India, literally like the earth was like an animal devouring it. And it was, and there's no rhyme or reason for them. Often you think like it's something like an aquifer or an empty oil well underneath there or something like that. But sometimes it's just the soil liquefies. It's the strangest thing happens. And I often wonder, if these are part of the earth changes. There's been a lot of these sinkholes. Like I've been following 14 and paranormal stuff all my life, and it's only in say the last 10 years that the sinkhole thing has taken off, and that would have been odd. I mean, I don't remember ever reading features in 14 times about it or anything back in the 80s or 90s. So there's something going on. These earth changes are definitely affecting them, and these sinkholes are basically, it's almost like it's the earth. You wonder if the earth is buckling or expanding or something like that,
There's one theory that I read, and it had to do with the fracking and taking the oil and stuff out of, or what is it, the fossil fuels or whatever out of the ground. And somebody said that it was basically like removing the synovial fluid from the earth. And so then the body sort of breaks down and it gets brittle and things just start collapsing.
Well, there's the abiotic oil theory, that oil is actually it creates itself in the bowels of the earth. It's almost like the earth's blood system. It's pulmonary.
That's more of what I meant.
Yeah, well, I mean that's there's also another one. Do you remember when the BP Horizon rig went up in the Gulf about 10 years ago, and all these military ships from all over the world suddenly like basically attacked it? Enoch Crane, God rest his soul, told me that he was a former oil executive anyway, and he told me the story that the rumor was on the ground that a type of oil came up out of the ground that was alive. It was like an animal, and if you touched it, it ran away. It moved, had a consciousness.
That reminds me of the black oil from the X-Files.
Yeah,
that's what I was about to say.
Yeah, so that fact becomes one of those things like The Simpsons, where they seem to predict the future. The X-Files seem to have done that a lot as well. But
Chaos magic.
They were terrified of this thing actually coming out in colossal numbers, that they actually threw chemicals in there that were banned by international law in order to, like they use chemicals on that oil slick that you'd never use in things like that were radioactive and stuff like that. They were desperate to kill it at any cost. So that's a spooky one. But Also, you wonder, does the earth get nutrition that way or something? Why do people pothole? Why do people cave to the depths of the earth and get lost down there? It's like they're almost. You ever notice those types are almost beckoned in there? I mean, does the earth, like the forest feeds on the stranger? Does the inside of the earth also feed on the stranger?
Yeah, we've got Mel's Hole over here in Washington State too. That would be another great thing for us to get on camera. But they talk about that people will throw carcasses of cows in there. They'll throw old vehicles, and it's just like a bottomless pit that nobody can.
Anything.
Yeah, and I think the military took that over for a while. Did they not, Timothy? You know?
I'm not sure about that. I do know that it was on private land, and I believe it still is on private land. I don't know how easily it is to access now. So we might have to dig into that and see if there's somebody we need to connect with to get permission to go there.
Yeah, I've read it. I read or saw documentaries about that years and years ago, maybe 20 years ago. I think the farmers were using as a refuge, a garbage dump, and they could throw.
They were dumping their old appliances,
tractors, and everything down there, and it never filled up. It never filled up, and they wouldn't hear the things crashing on the bottom.
There was another story, and I can't remember how many yards or feet it was, but it was an enormous length, 300, 500 yards full of rope. And I think maybe it was Mel. He attached a rope and a microphone to it and dropped it down in there, and it never touched the bottom.
Ugh. And then you wonder what the implications for gravity and things like that is. What happens?
Right.
When you get further you get down, what do you start floating back up?
It's again? Like outer space.
Yeah.
In the middle of the Earth.
We were talking about MK Ultra and the kind of mind control stuff and the magnetism that they were using on, was it the Philadelphia experiment where they put the giant magnetic coils there on that destroyer to mess with the troops? And then that makes me think again here that are there, you're talking about gravity and stuff around there. I makes me wonder if these sinkholes and some of these earth changes are being caused by solar activity or the lack thereof. I want to say we're going into, and you can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, if we're going into a solar minimum right now, I believe that it is. And when there's a solar minimum is when there's more dramatic weather. Again, if I say that wrong, please correct me down in the comments. But with that, I do wonder if there's some kind of output that our sun is changing that is messing with the magnetism of the earth. And yeah, there might be buckling and expanding, contracting. The planet's not this fixed rock that that slowly evolves. I think it's something that will have big changes suddenly, right? And they've talked about before. I mean, I think there's the possibility that the poles will flip and go 90 degrees or something, and that's how you'll have like old civilizations that were underneath oceans, rise up. Like I want to say that that's probably what happened with the Sphinx. It was covered under all that sand, which to me it looks like that's the bottom of an ocean at one point. Or now they're starting to go ahead, Timothy.
I was just going to say there is a whole extra theory about how old the Sphinx actually is, and I will not get the numbers right now. So please, in the comments, correct me. But it was said that for the Sphinx to have the type of weathering that it has, there would have had to been a nonstop flood and rain for 250 years or something like that in the Giza Plateau, which is not on record.
Yeah,
for
or
it to
underwater.
be 5,000 years old or whatever they say. So it's likely more 250,000 years old.
Yeah, or I still think there's a possibility. Sorry, I think it could have been underwater, and that would cause that kind of weathering on it if the Sphinx was submerged for a couple centuries.
Yeah, and that basically is going along with the theory. Like there had to have been water damage to it, so it had to be submerged or in constant rainfall for 200 and some years, which is not on record.
But also look at all the activity, around Antarctica. There seems to be a lot of you're not allowed to go down there. You're not allowed to visit. The only people that can go down there are scientists and military connected to the 4 or 5 countries that control it, and it's unbelievably secretive. Now we know that the magnetic poles, which is different than the North Pole, the magnetic poles have been wandering, and they're currently somewhere in northern Canada. And they're way off now. The northern one is way off. Now we know from wood records and fossil records that every 11,000 years or so, the magnetic poles flip. Not the Earth itself, but the magnetic poles flip. That's why they could read north, south, north, south, north, south, up along old rock and strata, going up it. Now, but I was talking to a friend of mine who said, yeah, but what if the magnetic poles are stationary because they're ultimately controlled by the sun, and the planet itself flips while the magnetic poles stay in the same place? You'd get the same reading. You'd get exactly the same readings, wouldn't you? Because the magnetic poles, it would appear that they flipped, but they didn't. It was actually the planet flipped. So you'd get the same north, south, all the way up the strata. And that would be catastrophic. It's hard to even imagine. And then there's also theories that the moon, now we can get into really far out theories now, that the moon actually stabilizes the Earth as deliberately on purpose. It's almost like there's a consciousness between the two planets. The magnetic pole is definitely overdue. We've known that for a while, the flip. It's known that with the CMEs from the sun, that they do impact upon the magnetosphere, which is a big magnetic thing around the Earth that stops, kind of deflects all the radiation around the Earth. And when that pushes on, when that's pushed on, it creates pressure in the atmosphere itself that you could have like sticking your finger into a balloon kind of thing. And that ultimately will affect the actual body of the Earth itself. So, I mean, we're so at mercy of what's outside this planet. It's not funny, you know.
And have you heard of over the past few decades, the migration patterns of, say, whales and birds? They're ending up in places they didn't mean to go to. Airline pilots, what are the guys in the towers? They have to rewrite the maps.
Yeah, they have to recalibrate the gyroscopes and everything. There's also another interesting theory that this HARP machine, which is real, which that was actually created trying to offset. One of the theories about that was to offset the magnetic pole flip, because we don't know the effects on electronics and like things like electrical motors, especially as we're all moving to electric cars and everything now. If the polarity of the Earth's magnetic field is shifted, how will that affect things like the flow of electricity and the flow of magnetism in electronic motors and AC and DC motors? So this is a huge, and that they realized this back in the 60s, and that's when the whole HARP thing came along. Is that's why they built it up in Alaska to try and create an artificial magnet. This is just a conspiracy theory, but a fun one, so that's an interesting idea too as well. They've been fighting a losing battle against the magnetic pole flip since the 60s. So what I think a lot of this, that's where those sinkholes are all coming from. I think there's colossal earth changes happening because, again, I have no memory of those sinkholes being in the media or in alternative media when I was growing up.
They really weren't.
No, not in the numbers they are now. Not the way they're being reported now.
And Timothy, you were talking about migration patterns and everything, and I imagine whatever, if it's magnetic, if it's some kind of natural phenomena that's messing with or is changing the neurology of the birds to want to go somewhere, I imagine that could affect people too, where if there's some kind of energies from space, that could be whipping us up. Thomas, you talk about psychic weather all the time, that could potentially some of these particles or waves or whatever they are coming in from the sun or from space, could that be affecting people and their own psychic weather or the collective psychic weather that we're all experiencing?
Oh, big time. I mean, the weather does affect people's behavior anyway, and this one. Oh, and so does the movement of cosmological things. Yes, it does. There's the humans and animal behavior is tremendous, and also clouds. I watch clouds a lot. And whenever I look at space weather reports online, I'll go out and look at the clouds, and you will definitely see different kinds of clouds appear. There's the high stratosphere clouds are definitely much more common, I've found anyway, during periods of extrasolar activity. So it would be surprising if people were not affected by it. It'd be surprising.
It would be unbelievable if they weren't.
Yeah, and and animals too. They're definitely, as you said, they're definitely affected by it. So, I mean, strange days are coming in terms of all this stuff, and people listening to this show really start to get used to this stuff and start thinking in terms of like, if the worst came to the worst, am I prepared? Like, to, this is where we can go on a whole other thing of like prepping and all other kinds of things. But it could happen and not affect the electric motors and not affect the electrical system. But it's something that people need to be more wary of. In fact, I'd say there's a bigger, we hear all about viruses and superbugs and all this stuff. I think the magnetic pole flip would be a much more potential hazard than any of those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the implications would be much more severe.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So basically what you need to do is make sure you're ready for a pole shift.
Yeah. and hope it doesn't happen too soon,
Yeah. Get your water and your food. Okay, so moving on. This one I thought was super interesting, and I would love to hear what you all think. Headline reads, "Cursed doll with evil sign nailed to chest is hung from tree and it is spooking the locals. The mysterious cursed doll is tied by a rope onto a small piece of wood and is covered by a sign which reads, 'Evil lives here,' on a tree in Old Swan in Liverpool, England." So there's actually a very interesting backstory to why the legend of it is living on, and which is one possible explanation for the weird doll is that it is a reference to the discovery of a mass grave in nearby St. Oswald. A total of 3,561 bodies were found in coffins piled 16 deep by council workmen in 1973 and were subsequently cremated.
Well,
so this doll is hanging out.
Well, it doesn't surprise me this is Liverpool, because Liverpool, I mean, I lived there as a kid. I know the city quite well. I go there all the time. And they don't call it Shiverpool for nothing. It has more paranormal activity than just about any city in the world. It's like it's so out there that people accept it as being a part of life. It's like, oh, I had a time slip today, like this like this kind of thing, calm down, like I just had another fucking time slip, it's that's like what it's like there. In fact, Tom Sleeman has written something like 30 odd books about it. I'm going to try and get him to be a guest on Symposium, but there's a theory that there's a gigantic quartz seam under the city, and this is what causes all the paranormal stuff there. But it's an interesting culturally interesting place too. It's it's in England, but it's not really English. It's kind of Celtic, and it has its own vibe and everything like that. And it produced like the Beatles, and all this music came out of it. And they're Echo and the Bunnymen were from there and bands like that. Yeah. And the thing with this, that it's one of those cities, like the Strange Towns. It's on the edge of altered realities. Big huge river there. It was once the biggest port in the world in the center of the British Empire, and so it was like all the ships that came in and out of the British Empire came through there. And it has a kind of and the people who live there, they're very magical. There's something very fairy and elfish-like about them, and they're very different than other English people. They're almost like a breed to themselves. And so when I saw the doll story, I thought to myself, that was like some kind of folkish ancestral memory thing of the past brought up to the present, a kind of a Scouse voodoo, if you want to call it that, But I found that story quite interesting because it's a very friendly city. There's no kind of sense of maliciousness there. So that seemed like the doll thing seemed Santeria, voodoo. It had that kind of intensity about it. But it's either that or it's a prank. And
right, it's one or the other.
And both are kind of cool in their own way.
Absolutely. Yeah, Liverpool, I have never been there, but it does seem to have a sort of time slippage about it. It's almost like if you're approaching, an event horizon, things just happen there.
Yeah, if I get Tom Sleeman on his books, his books have amazing stories of people walking into a pub and it's the 1950s, and there's another famous story he told of a guy who saw a newspaper headline that Noel Gallagher from Oasis had been stabbed to death. And he went in and said, that's horrible what happened to Noel Gallagher. And they said, what am I talking about? And the newspaper headline had changed. So it seems like, and Anthony Peake is from there and that area, and so is Neil Rushton. And they tell you that it's full of weird, they've all had weird time slip experiences there. So what about like if that doll was someone from a past time slip into the present, bringing kind of folk magic, like cunning folk magic into the present? It's so cool that the whole story when you start expanding it that way.
So I think we need to go there and do some filming on location and maybe go find this doll.
Yeah, when you're talking about the prank thing, I immediately thought of Thomas's story about taking the spray painting the army dolls pink and putting a magnet on them and throwing them up. But I like what you said too about the quartz scene, because I've been having this idea, because I play with piezoelectric stuff all the time, and I'm just wondering, does the piezo or piezo, as you guys call over there, if there's quartz or layers of quartz separated by soil, could there be some kind of piezoelectric DC? It would be DC current being generated by that. And again, going back to the magnetism, I see we were talking to David Oman yesterday on the symposium about the gigantic DC EMF reading there at his property on Cielo Drive, where all the paranormal stuff is happening. So it's like, you're talking about it being some kind of portal with, if there's one there where there's a gigantic naturally occurring magnetic anomaly, could that same thing occur where there are areas with layers of quartz underground? Could there be nodes, if you want to call them, or some kind of, one-way or two-way portal that, could mess with time as well as space, not necessarily, just bringing entities or ghosts through, but could also, do some kind of time slippage thing. And that would be fascinating if that doll were from a previous era, or, somebody could have just put it up today as a prank.
Or someone in the present era, their consciousness was switched back to the time of the cunning folk. And they did that, I
like that.
That kind of throws us in with the first story about mind replacement.
Mind replacement. Well, that goes back to the memory implant.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And wasn't that, okay, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but with the we were talking to David Oman yesterday in the Manson murders, wasn't there something psychic about the targets that Manson picked out for the murders, that he was the one kind of as the mastermind behind it, but he had some kind of psychic vision, allegedly?
The helter-skelter thing. But yeah, I didn't want to say anything yesterday because we were on this different subject, but that Manson's thing is all up for grabs. There's some very strange ultra type things around that as well, and other things. And I think separating the murders from what caused it are two important things. And but I don't think we'll ever get to the bottom of that story ever. I
don't think there's a way.
Yeah, but I just thought the song "Strawberry Fields" by the Beatles. That Strawberry Fields is a real field that's around the corner from John Lennon's house, and it was like where nothing is real. Strawberry Fields, where nothing is real, and all the streets around there are all called Druid Close, Druid Glen, Druid Avenue, and across the street is a stone circle, the Calder Stones. So he grew up in an area filled with those energies in Liverpool, and that's probably where the psychedelic thing became so deep to him. And interesting, when he went to New York, he was there during the height of that. We'll talk about another program, the height of the whole UFO flaps along the Hudson Valley and stuff like that. And he even wrote about that in one of his last songs, there's UFOs over New York and I'm not too surprised, that song. And so that's a synchronistic thing as well, that's a synchronistic thing. But I love stories like that. I love anything to do with folk magic, and I love anything that would, whatever brought us to that place. It'd be interesting to see how that story develops, if it does develop at all.
And hopefully it will.
Yeah.
On the topic of psychic weather, I would like to take this time now to break to Thomas with the psychic weather report.
Is it bad? Is it great? Are you happy? Are you irate? The weekend psychic weather.
Hello, this is Thomas Sheridan here. I'm here with the first psychic weather report for this week. We're at the summer solstice in summer 2021. how I determine psychic weather is I look at things like Twitter. Although Twitter is an open sewer, it's a fantastic way of observing behavioral modification, changes, and conditioning among the masses. It's as useful as driving on a road and seeing how they behave in traffic. You all know that everyone's affected by psychic behaviors, and you start to see certain things every day, agitation on the roads and so on. So I use a combination of these things as well as auguries to determine the psychic weather. In my case, it's birds. I would say this week we're in a time of bewilderment. I noticed a lot of birds have been flying into cars, finding dead or injured at the side of the road. I've actually rescued one at the weekend. I'm seeing people walking around with in a daze, with their, literally, they don't, like, their eyes hanging out of their heads, so they don't know where they are, what they're doing. There's a great sense of bewildering and bewilderment. In terms of your own personal safety, I think you're pretty safe at the moment. They're not acting up. They're not firing up or Renfielding. They're probably between peaks if you think of a sine wave. They've had the hysteria of the whole lockdown and all that other stuff that goes along with it, the needlecraft. They're now in the trough, waiting for their second set of orders, either from the collective unconscious or by their media masters, but they're currently walking around in a state of bewilderment. So the week in psychic weather this week is beware of bewildering people who are walking around, driving around, carrying on, and are not doing anything of their own cognition or their own free will. And just remember to stay out of their way. And that's been the week in psychic weather with me, Thomas Sheridan.
Is it bad? Is it great? Are you happy? Are you irate? The week in psychic weather.
Jason, do you have anything to add to your psychic weather report?
No, but I have been, just to repeat what Thomas said, I have been seeing that here too, with people just wandering around as if, they're awaiting orders. Like I said, I was in the military for a while, so I'm used to what it's like when you've got bored soldiers around, and when there's bored soldiers or bored servicemen, servicewomen around. That's when the bad things start to happen, when people start getting reckless and then getting into weird little bouts of trouble. But I wouldn't be too concerned about anything. Just be careful, with as usual with driving around. So if they're being crazy drivers on the road, just give yourself a little extra space between you and the car in front of you.
Or pedestrians walking into the car, like walking into in front of a bus or something. You get a lot of stories this week about people wandering in front of the trains. Like, I get a lot of that this week.
Or those insane bicyclists who just think that they're a semi-truck driving on the road until
like, I'm literally driving in a metal box. What makes you think that you're stronger than me?
Well, that's why we have why psychopaths sound so much like psychopaths.
I just saw that one.
Fantastic. So, word to the wise: stay safe. Okay, so this one I found to be super interesting and also shocking, seeing as actually I live somewhat close to this area and I have never heard of it before. Tahoe Tessie. So the headline reads, read this before you swim in Lake Tahoe. This might be Tessie at your toes. A Lake Tahoe tour company offers a 2-hour boat ride for $70. Tales of Lake Tahoe's mythical, or at least unidentified, underwater inhabitants span centuries. Indigenous folklore from the region includes descriptions of water babies, dangerous and powerful creatures whose cry can serve as an omen of death. Following the gold rush, when white settlers pushed their way west and grabbed land around Lake Tahoe, murmurs of curiously scaly monsters began to pop up in local lore and in the news. Have you guys heard of this?
No, but I've heard a lot about the kind of Fortean stuff of Lake Tahoe. And this one of the reasons I love cryptid stories, especially around lakes. It's like, there's two ways of looking at this, right? Is there really a monster and like an unknown animal or something living down there, or an extinct species that has survived? Or is it the psychic representation of wickedness hidden at the bottom of the lake? Now, the Lake Tahoe is famous for all the mafias are all been dumped over there in their cement shoes. And apparently there's something about the water at the bottom of Lake Tahoe that scuba divers have gone down there. I don't know if it's an urban myth or not, but you'll see, Vinny and Sal in their 1930s clothes, swim with the fishes, this kind of thing at the bottom of the lake, and they're perfectly preserved bodies apparently, and so. And we do know the mafia were taking Lou Brasi and the rest of them all out there to dump them. And so that's the thing with the cryptid. Is it a real monster, or is it a psychic manifestation of the darkness subconscious of the lake?
You think like a collective shadow?
Maybe, I don't know, but I'm always fascinated by why so many Christian stories are about exorcising a monster from a lake. Is it almost like there's some saint rolled into town and they've got I absolve you of all the sins of the time you threw the girl into the lake because she had an affair with the mayor? That's what.
And as far as we know, Crowley wasn't there, so he wasn't summoning anything.
No. Jason,
at Lake Tahoe.
Well, I was going to say too, Lake Tahoe is man-made, right, or is it a naturally occurring lake?
I think it's natural.
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say similar to this, when there are other like ghost stories and stuff around those reservoirs where there used to be like a city that they flooded in, and then there's still that kind of collective memory of the folks who lived in that city that I think causes. But if there's no city underneath Lake Tahoe, we can just edit this out. But I would wonder though, are there remains of something underneath that lake, like we've talked about before, that there's remnants of ancient civilizations and stuff. What's underneath Lake Tahoe besides Vinny swimming with the fishes, but what's down there?
Which we need to get our scuba gear for.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jason, because that John Borman's incredible movie Deliverance is all about, ultimately they're flooding that valley in Georgia, and they want to be the last people to canoe down that river because it's going to be a lake. And so they're flooding the entire valley and everything in it. And at the very end of the movie, the sheriff, who kind of knows Burt Reynolds and John Voight probably did murder those guys, not murder, but self-defense, he kind of lets them go. And he goes, soon this whole valley will be filled underwater. And he goes, the best goddamn thing that ever happened to it. Because there was so much darkness in the community. And then you think you're drinking that water if it's for drinking water, not electricity. You're drinking that, but then you think it was to electricity, then it's transmuted into something else. There's endless horror stories you could write around those themes.
Yeah, and this just reminds me when I was stationed in Columbia, South Carolina, my last duty station in the military, and we used to go to Lake Murray a lot, which is again, it used to be a little town, and up until I don't know when, but they dammed up that whatever river it is, and there's this big man-made lake there, and there's still divers will go down there, and there's still remnants of the old city. But I mean I've always not had very good bearings with water and get a little freaked out with deep stuff. But when I would sit in my little inner tube drinking beer out there, I would get the willies really bad. Like, what is underneath me? Like I could feel this like
it's
horrible,
not right.
Yeah, just this not right feeling. I'd be like, well, that's enough water for me. I'm going to go sit back on the boat. But
there's a lock up the road, Loch Talt, and they don't even know how deep it is. They've never found the bottom. So we're back to another bottomless pit thing. And
right.
the local story was that there's a big mountain beside it, that the lake was deeper than the mountain was next to it, was higher. And up in the 1970s, some scientists and TV crew came out from Dublin to measure the depth of the lake, and they couldn't find the bottom of it using the sounding gear. So again, where does that water go to? And that water has a lot of spooky things that people have just walked up to it, and I don't want to say too much because there's neighbors and stuff. It affects them, but they've walked into the water and just vanished, and trucks have just driven off the road into it and gone. It's a carnivorous lake, like a carnivorous wood or a carnivorous landscape. With the Lake Tahoe thing, I've never heard about a monster in that one. But again, these are fantastic stories. That's why I love the cryptid stories, because they open up. And once you get outside the framework of this just being about a monster or an animal, you're launched into such phenomenal worlds of Fortean investigation and speculation.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say one last thing about Lake Tahoe. I had to look it up on the map. That is near the Bay Area. And I want to say, Thomas, you've said before, or somebody said before, that there are different hell gates on the planet. There's one like in Turin, right? And wasn't San Francisco allegedly, or the Bay Area allegedly, one of these?
Yeah. There's hells, the cities, the devil cities. Turin, Budapest, and Bâle in Switzerland is one, is the most common one, with Turin, the center, the devil's city. Now, what's interesting, I was there in Turin making a film a few years ago, and there's a San Francisco street, the Italian film director, Dario Argento, sure enough, in Turin, there's a San Francisco street. And then San Francisco was listed in, I read an interview with him where he said, yes, there's two other cities that are Devil's Gates as well, London and San Francisco. So, yeah, interesting, very interesting.
Very interesting.
And it just makes me wonder about with Nessie, with the Loch Ness monster, was allegedly, that could have been something having to do with Aleister Crowley not having completed the Abramelin Mage right there, and having some kind of psychic energy being zapped into the water there. And with Tahoe and its proximity to the San Francisco Bay Area, I would wonder if throughout the San Francisco Bay and any bodies of water there, if there could be, again, psychic deposits of, standing waves of psychic energy there somehow, causing, cryptids that aren't necessarily solid, like, we were talking about with Bigfoot and Sasquatch, that, you only get fuzzy pictures of Bigfoot because it's probably not in this dimension. It's probably, on the edge of the coin, so to speak, between this reality construct and another reality construct.
Well, before the whole IT thing, San Francisco was the center of the kind of like spooky stuff in America. That whole hippie stuff really came out of stuff like the Temple of Seth and the Church of Satan. And LaVey talks about, Anton LaVey in one of his essays talks about, as he was a kid, there was an abandoned swimming pool complex in San Francisco. And he said underneath it, they used to encounter Lovecraftian type creatures and everything. So you might be onto something very real there with that interjection, Jason. It's really food for thought.
So thank you all so much for joining us for our first week. The last story we're going to bring to you today, the headline reads, American Airlines canceling hundreds of flights through mid-July. American Airlines is canceling hundreds of flights for at least the next few weeks as a combination of factors threaten regular business operation. A heavy uptick in travel, labor shortages, and weather are contributing to the cancellations, expected to last until mid-July at the earliest. Jason, take it away.
Yeah, this is real interesting because it seems like it's not just the airlines that are having a shortage of employees right now. I saw something else about that they're, with shortage of pilots right now because of this, but also just, when I'm out and about in town here, you go around to all the fast food places and it's as if, they've all got these signs on the windows of, need employees right now hiring, and there'll be places closing down early because they just don't have the staff to do it. And having traveled down to Southern California recently, I was talking to my mother there about it. Just seems like there's less people around right now. Like, there's labor shortages and, going out. I mean, yes, I get it. Everybody's been locked down for the last year. So is it that, everybody's still inside on their unemployment checks, drinking beer and smoking weed and haven't got any sun for the last year? Or, are there people disappearing? Are folks, we talked about portals and stuff earlier. Are there legitimately people disappearing off the planet right now?
I think that is a fascinating subject to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's happened before in 2008. I started noticing that people I knew kind of just vanished and they were not showing up on the internet or social media, and they've gone forever. And it was just a weird thing that happened. But now I see the same thing here. There's a massive labor shortage here when you think it should be the other way around because of the lockdown. They were damaging the economy. And again, all the fast food places, McDonald's are looking for hundreds of people in Ireland. And also a friend of mine work for a recruiting firm here that hires engineers and top-end scientists, top-end people for big infrastructure projects and companies like Intel and stuff. And they can't find people fast enough. There's just a complete lack of labor. And I notice the roads are empty as well. And even when it should be busy, there should be a lot more traffic and stuff like that. You do wonder sometimes if the whole concept of the parallel society has become literal or something. Maybe we've actually hexed it into it, or actually hexing them away or hexing ourselves out of it. But it'd be nice. It's a weird thing that America's basically opened up, and why would they be canceling all these flights? I mean, there's conspiratorial things you could say too, like maybe staff have died from, the needlecraft and so on. There's all kinds of things you could say. But I've noticed this phenomenon in the past. 2008, which was a very pivotal year for a lot of people. When I look back over my own research, and maybe it's happening again. Maybe they, the reality tunnels readjust every so often, and that isn't extra weight, that dead weight of you is not needed anymore, is taken out of your reality tunnel and into someone else's.
It's like if you were playing a video game and all the NPCs disappeared.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great?
We can only hope.
Oh, I was going to chime in with that, and I wish I had my tinfoil hat here to put on, but this is one I'd be putting on. So next time I'll have one. But my idea would be that, okay, so if something like this were a regular occurrence, and perhaps we saw it in 2008, perhaps we've seen it other times, that if there were people, in the upper echelons that were aware of this, what better way to cover it up than with a pandemic? And, if people are disappearing, just that the whole Rona thing could be just, we've been talking about for a while. What is this actually about?
People.
Yeah, get used to not seeing people, get used to staying in your house. Like, we've been talking about for the last year, what is this really about? It's not just, there's no guy outside saying, bring out your dead. There's not bodies everywhere yet, but there's been this alleged pandemic the whole time. So I've just wondered if people are disappearing, could this be because, well, there actually is some kind of either natural or created phenomena where people are disappearing. Taking my tinfoil hat off and putting it away.
2020
Never do that.
and 2021 have been so strange. I'm open to anything. And it's probably, we could probably, instead of the week in strange, we could call it the year in strange. This is things. I think that as this show develops over the next few months, we are just going to be, our jaws will be hanging open with the constant strangeness. It's high strangeness.
I'm going to have to quit my day job to keep up.
Yep. And I'll have to get one of those kind of like 1970s pimp tinfoil hats, like a cavalier hat made of tinfoil.
Oh, you guys, thank you so much. This has been an awesome first show. I think we did a great job. Thank you to our audience. Any questions, comments, please leave them down below. We will address them. We will also leave links. So feel free to research this stuff on your own. Reach out to us. We will help you in any way that we can. And thank you so much for joining us for our first episode of The Week in Strange.